Thanks so much for joining us. Tomorrow marks 3 years since Russia invaded Ukraine, and many world leaders are expected to gather in Kyiv to show their support. This comes as Russia launched more than 200 drones in an overnight attack on Ukraine, the largest since the war began. President Zelenskyy condemned the attack and called for unity among Ukraine's allies. President Donald Trump says the U.S. is pretty close to a deal with Ukraine. He is negotiating for access to Ukraine's vast natural resources, such as critical minerals and oil, in exchange for security guarantees and ongoing American aid. As I said, those talks continue, but Ukrainian officials said this morning they would not compromise territorial integrity or sovereignty. Arseniy Yatsenyuk served as Prime Minister of Ukraine from 2014 to 2016. I spoke to him on Friday about how Ukraine should deal with the new U.S. government and the support that he wants to see from Canada. Former Prime Minister of Ukraine, Arseniy Yatsenyuk, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Rosemary. Thank you.
Monday, of course, marks the 3-year anniversary of Russia's war on Ukraine, and there are world leaders heading to Kyiv to talk about security guarantees and obviously to show support for Ukraine and for the president. What do you think will come from those talks? What do you hope will come from the talks?
Well, let me start with the words of gratitude to the Canadian people. And it's such a pleasure for me to address independent, sovereign, and proud Canada. And your contribution in our victory is a huge one. In terms of EU participation and strong, I would say, signs of Ukraine's support that we expect on the 24th of February, we believe that the entire European Commission is to pay the visit to Ukraine, and we're going to have a huge representation of our allies and friends. But on the other hand, what am I concerned about? Mm-hmm. I am concerned less about the show. I am concerned more about the real deliverables. The European Union and all Ukrainian allies have to be on the forefront. So we have to be very, very proactive. And that's an issue because, lip service is perfect. But it's time for clear-cut actions.
So what does that mean then to you, Mr. Yatsenyuk? What does that look like? Is it more arms, more weapons? And can any of that happen if you, by some chance, lose U.S. support?
Correct. You actually provided a perfect answer. So I believe that the European Parliament is to pass a special decision, which is to envisage to increase the military expenditures for the European Union, to provide a clear-cut security aid package for Ukraine, and to lend the support to our American friends, saying that, look, if we increase our military expenditures, you are not allowed to decrease your military expenditures.
Right.
If we support Ukraine, you folks in the U.S. Senate and in the U.S. House has to support Ukraine too. And we expect to get a new supplement to your budget to provide additional both ammo and financial support for Ukraine. If we prolong and extend sanctions, you guys have to do the same. If we are fighting for the free world, you're going to do the same. And this is the way how unity looks.
How do you deal, though, Mr. Yatsenyuk, with a president who this past week called President Zelenskyy a dictator because he has not held an election during a war, has said that Ukraine started this war? What do you make of those comments? And how do you deal with a president saying those things right now?
It is Russia that started this war. President Zelenskyy is completely legitimate, and Russia is to pay the price for this. And we strongly believe that the United States is to help Ukraine to prevail in this war. In terms how to deal with the new administration, look, we are well aware about this administration. And frankly speaking, I am excited why so many people are so frustrated. The leopard doesn't change its spots. Okay, so we have to work with this administration. Either we want Putin to win or we want Trump to win. In my humble opinion, I believe it's much better when Trump wins. Let's give him what he wants in order to take what we want. Canada is chair of G7.
Yes.
And this G8 would never happen. Never. Because that's Russia want to be back in G8. As Russia believes that Russia is completely rehabilitated. So as a chair of G7, Canada could endorse a kind of joint resolution where Canadians will say, look, we're going to increase our military expenditures, and you Americans have to increase too. We're going to support Ukraine, and you Americans have to do the same. We're going to purchase your ammo, and you're going to provide the land lease for Ukraine. So once again, we have to be on the forefront, on the forefoot.
You said we should give the president what he wants. What do you think he wants? Because it seemed as though he wanted peace, that he wanted this to be resolved, and he indeed promised that. So what do you think is his goal here in terms of his rhetoric?
What he wants. The president wants to be in the spotlight. Let's give him this spotlight once again in order to get what we want. And we want sustainable, durable, just, and fair peace. We want to deter Russia. We want to preserve our unity. So we want to preserve North Atlantic Treaty Organization. These are the primary and historic goals of every single country that fights for democracy in this world. Otherwise, look, who's going to prevail? Putin, Kim Jong-un, Russia, North Korea, China, Venezuela, Iran, and the rest of the pariahs. So this is a watershed moment.
Yes.
Let's put aside emotions. We have to be very tough, realistic, prudent, and smart, and think out of the box.
One of the things I want to ask you about before I let you go is you served as Prime Minister from 2014 to 2016. I think that's when we last spoke. That was around the time Russia annexed Crimea. I'm sure you know that President Trump has threatened several times to make Canada the 51st state. I wonder, as someone that experienced annexation, what you think of that and how you think Canada should respond.
Rosemary, let me reiterate once again. It's my privilege to address Canada as an independent, sovereign, and proud state. And this will last forever.
What needs to happen in the coming weeks, Mr. Yatsenyuk, in order for this to go the right direction, as you say, at this watershed moment?
Well, in order to turn the tide, we need to be very active, not just to release the hot air, but to release a clear-cut decisions and to undertake a clear-cut decisions. To press the pedal to the metal.
Mm-hmm. Former Prime Minister Yatsenyuk, thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thank you, Rosemary.
If it guarantees peace for Ukraine, if you really need me to resign, I am ready. I can exchange it for NATO.
That's Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy just this morning, saying that he's willing to give up his presidency in exchange for Ukraine's NATO membership. Tomorrow marks 3 years since Russia invaded Ukraine. Many world leaders are expected to gather in Kyiv, either there or virtually, to show their support. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau had this to say earlier last week.
This period of peace, stability, prosperity for the world happens because we had rules around borders, around not invading your neighbors, that Russia chose deliberately to violate.
So what does this mean for Canada's allies on the world stage? How can Canada support Ukraine while facing threats from the United States here at home? A lot to get into on this one. Let's bring back the Sunday Scrum. Marie Vestel, editorial writer for Le Devoir in Ottawa. Robert Benzie, Queen's Park bureau chief for the Toronto Star. And Gary Mason, a columnist with the Globe and Mail, who is normally in Vancouver, but today is in California. Good to see everyone again. Gary, I promised I'd start with you, so I will. What do you make of these, how this has unfolded over the past 10 days or so, and how the language the president is using about Ukraine and Russia is very similar to language that he is using against us?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's actually astonishing how quickly Donald Trump has upended a liberal democratic world order that has existed for 80 years, and he has completely smashed it to smithereens. It's quite clear that he is prepared to foist a deal on Ukraine It will not be a great deal for Ukraine, and no one believes that it will. He's also going to try and extract as much as he can out of Ukraine in exchange for U.S. support, continued U.S. support in some form. So he's just going to grind them as much as he can. And it's just astonishing. And in the process, he has completely, delivered a message to American allies that America cannot be trusted anymore. And I think people are, very quickly coming to terms with what that means. I mean, we've been dealing with it, for about a month now. The Europeans are really now getting a real taste of what it feels like to be abandoned by a key ally. And now they're trying to realize what this actually means.
So in the face of that, Rob, I mean, these are hard questions. What does Canada do? I mean, the Prime Minister certainly showing support for Ukraine. You would expect any Prime Minister would do that. But how do you position yourself when you yourself are being threatened by the President in a real way as well?
I mean, Rosie, I would say the threats from Washington now are economic. Donald Trump is not going to invade Canada with an army. Is he going to go into a trade war with us that will be debilitating for both Americans and Canadians? Yes, probably. That's what will happen with tariffs. I think Gary's right that Trump has upended world order since the Second World War, but I'm not sure. I think he after Trump, and Trump will be gone in 4 years, and after Trump, I think we will see a renewed kind of NATO, I hope. And I think that's why, I mean, Ukraine is very important to Canada. There are 1.5 million Ukrainian Canadians. Canada was the first country to recognize an independent Ukraine back when Brian Mulroney was Prime Minister. Remember Prime Minister Stephen Harper saying to Vladimir Putin at a G20, I believe it was, saying, look, you get out of Crimea. And I thought that was a very bold thing for our then Prime Minister to do. And I think we have to, I know Trump is taking up a lot of oxygen, but at the end of the day, I think we have to remember he's actually a very bad negotiator. I mean, he's negotiating from a position of strength against Putin, you would think, and yet he's making the concessions for a Western democracy. So he's actually shown himself to be pretty weak on the world stage. Oddly enough, I mean, for an American president to not be in a position of strength against a Russian president, I mean, the war has been very, very bad for Russia. We don't know the casualty rate, but we know that it's many, many, exponentially more people have died than were killed during their unsuccessful Afghan campaign back in the 1980s, which led to the end of the Soviet Union. So I think after all of this is over, I think there'll be a shift, I hope.
I wonder whether the efforts, Marie, that are going to happen tomorrow in Kyiv, and then the French president going to Washington this week, the British Prime Minister going to Washington, whether any of those things sort of stabilize the world, whether we are not, as we've talked about here, whether there's not a total upheaval of the rules-based order of the world, but there is an attempt to stabilize things, through those meetings.
Yeah, I'm not as optimistic, I think, as Rob. I think what we're seeing is pretty dramatic, not just for Ukraine, and it's dramatic for Ukraine, but we've also seen in the past 2 weeks the Americans say that they don't really care about European security anymore, and that Ukraine is on its own, but Europe is on its own on its eastern flank. And the situation is that since World War II, the West has become more and more dependent on the U.S. to help with its security. And so we can all band together and say that we want to help Ukraine, as we should. But President Zelenskyy himself, when he was in, I believe, Munich, or anyway, when he was in Western Europe 10 days ago, himself, he went to ask for security guarantees in case Russia did try to come back and take even more territory. He himself said, but, without the U.S., thanks, Europe, but it's not enough. If you look at NATO spending, and it's a very quick calculation that I did last night, so please don't at me, but it's about $967 billion last year from the U.S. in defense spending. It's a little over 500 from all the other NATO members put together. So it's essentially almost double the U.S. puts in than everyone else together. You just can't take the U.S. out, which is what President Trump is saying, and be as effective up against Russia. So it's really hard to see. It's thankful that you have the French president, Germany up until today's election, the UK, Canada in a smaller manner sticking together and insisting that Ukraine be part of this conversation and that its sovereignty be respected. But it's really hard to see how you torque that balance if the U.S., as President Trump has told us for a few weeks now, has resolutely decided that he is in a new alliance and it's not with Western countries.
And the fact that he is, wants to negotiate peace, whether Ukraine is at the table or not, but also negotiating this deal to have access to Ukraine's natural resources for them to pay back, quote unquote, pay back the support of the United States. I mean, Gary, I find that also very disconcerting because one of the things he's particularly after there is minerals, critical minerals, which we also have. And I don't know what to make of those things, but it is certainly disconcerting.
Well, it's disconcerting. And I guess the question is, how desperate is Ukraine to sign a peace deal? And are they prepared to, give up everything in the name of, and putting an end to the killing? I mean, it's we've all known for a long time that Donald Trump is a purely transactional individual, being a real estate agent. He just sees everything as, okay, we'll give you this, but you need to give us something back. That never used to be the policy of, the American foreign policy at all. It was like, we're out there to protect you, to protect Western interests more generally. So the world has completely changed. It's become a hard power world, Rosie. And for nations like Canada, we are a soft power. Europe, the European Union now understand they have to become collectively a hard power. That's hard power is going to dominate world affairs probably for the next 10, 20 years, maybe longer. We don't know. There are no guardrails around Donald Trump anymore. The traditional Republicans that sort of tried to keep him in line in his first term, they're all gone. They've been replaced by sycophants and people that just bow down to him every day. So it's actually a very scary time. I've never been more pessimistic about, the future of, world affairs. As long as that maniac is in the White House, I think it's going to be a very scary time.
Rob, I have 30 seconds. Is Doug Ford on track to win the biggest majority in Ontario's political history? What are we thinking?
Segue, Rosie.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, I went from very bleak to this.
Donald Trump in the White House. Well, look, you just had David Coletta, who does the polling for the Toronto Star, on, and the polls that he's been doing for us suggest that Mr. Ford is going to be reelected. Mr. Ford called an early election to exploit the fact that Donald Trump is threatening a trade war with Canada, and Ford's whole MO on this one is protect Ontario. That's his campaign slogan. So I suspect well, the interesting race will be who is going to be the official opposition, whether it's the New Democrats or who have been in opposition since 2018, or if it's the Liberals.
I can never not ask you Ontario questions because you're so smart about it. So thank you for that, and thank you all very much for your smart thoughts on that topic too. Good to see you all. Thanks.